Now, Karl Marx once wisely observed that while gold and silver may not naturally be money, money is by nature gold and silver. Gold is also present in devices like mobile phones. But how to ensure that money spent on a phone doesn't end up funding armed groups involved in atrocities like killing civilians or mass rape? Not very easily is the short answer, especially if the gold you bought went through Dubai. A former partner of Ernst & Young has told Newsnight he audited the biggest refiner there and found clear breaches of international rules designed to stop the trade in so-called conflict gold. After his firm, slogan "Building a Better Working World," turned a blind eye, he resigned, taking his story to the campaigning NGO Global Witness, who passed documents to Newsnight, Al Jazeera and The Guardian. Andy Verity's been investigating.
Forget blood diamonds. Is the gold on your finger, round your neck, or in the circuitry of your smartphone tainted with blood? In the eastern Congo, abusive armed groups exploit more than 400 gold mines. Extracted under harsh conditions, it's smuggled out in pockets and plastic bags across porous borders to Uganda and Burundi, out to the rest of the world. And unlike these pale imitations, it could be sold to you with no trace of its origin.
Millions of people have died in eastern Congo from this war, and the war is in large part funded by minerals, including gold.
The risk of conflict gold entering the supply chain, entering Dubai and entering the global supply chain is extremely high.
We've learned that auditors from Ernst & Young found that Dubai's biggest refiner, Khaloti, was clearly failing to carry out all the proper checks on its gold supply. They alerted the regulator in Dubai, but the regulator changed its audit procedures. That allowed the most serious findings to be hidden from the gold buying public, and Ernst & Young's managers went along with that. The partner who led the audit isn't happy about it. He's resigned and gone on the record to tell me why.
I wouldn't be able to live with a decision like that. I wouldn't be able to come back home at the end of the day and look at my children in the eyes.
Dubai has turned itself into an extravagantly glamorous destination for business people and holidaymakers. According to Global Witness and the United Nations, it's also a big destination for conflict gold. With about a fifth of the world's trade in physical gold, that's an image Dubai doesn't want. So Dubai's metals regulator, housed in the Al Mas Tower, adopted international standards. To show traders were checking their gold supply thoroughly, there'd be a third-party auditor to check up on them, someone respectable like Ernst & Young.
Refiners, those who melt the gold down into bars or other forms, are the choke point in the supply chain. They have a really important role to play. They must carry out checks all the way up the upstream part of the supply chain back to the mine to find out what the conditions of extraction were, whether the gold has funded conflict, and what's happened along the way.
A year ago, Ernst & Young's auditors came to this Khaloti refinery in Sharjah to see how carefully it was checking up on its suppliers or not. Khaloti's managers hadn't bargained on how thorough the audit team would be.
During the course of the audit, we started discovering severe and disturbing findings, such as cash transactions of over than $5.2 billion by one refiner in 1 year. We found that there were about 4 to 5 tons of gold bars, coated silver, smuggled out of Morocco, arriving in Dubai declared as gold, as well as failure to verify the sources of high-risk gold.
One supplier had even been linked indirectly with armed rebels in eastern Congo. And later, Khaloti told them that paying for gold-painted silver was normal. To the auditors, it was the worst sort of breach, classified as zero tolerance. Remember this building? Khaloti's on the 35th floor. The regulator, the Dubai Multi-Commodity Centre, is on the first floor. Mr. Rehan says it was far from keen on publicly shaming its upstairs neighbour. In May, the Dubai regulator's guidance required details of the auditor's initial findings to be made public. By November, that requirement had disappeared. Mr. Rehan says that moved the auditing goalposts, and he believes it was no coincidence.
We told them about the severity of these findings, as well as our final conclusion, which would state that the risk of conflict minerals entering Dubai is extremely high. So the Dubai-based regulator was not happy about that, and when they realized that we will not alter our findings, they went ahead and they changed their own guidelines in such a way that our findings and our final conclusions are not made public.
The Dubai regulator denies changing its rules to keep the detail of the damaging findings out of public view. It says the rule changes were based on a consultant's advice and in line with international standards. Ernst & Young's own code of conduct says its staff don't hide from or ignore issues. Concerned his firm was letting a cover-up take place, Mr. Rehan wrote to Mark Otte, Ernst & Young's head of Europe, Middle East and Africa, urging him to notify the UK regulator of the findings. He copied it to Mark Weinberger, the firm's global chairman and chief executive.
Since we're auditing against the UK-based guidelines as well, the guideline says the auditor shall notify the UK-based regulator within 24 hours of discovering a zero-tolerance event. So I notified Ernst & Young about that, and they decided not to notify the UK-based regulator.
Ernst & Young's managers said the firm wasn't required to notify the UK regulator and claimed it would be a breach of confidentiality to do so. These confidential documents show that the audit team's findings were initially accepted by the refiner, Culotti, which privately acknowledged there'd been a zero-tolerance breach of the rules. But in November, after the goalposts had moved, Culotti was able to declare itself fully compliant, and Ernst & Young endorsed that as a fair view. Once melted, of course, gold is clean. It can be sold to jewellery manufacturers, banks or governments, and if it does have a murky origin, customers will be none the wiser. If refiners don't ask the right questions, the whole regime for cracking down on conflict gold simply doesn't work.
Well, Culotti, the DMCC and Ernst & Young all say they acted properly. Culotti said allegations of non-compliance were without merit and it's adhered to all regulatory requirements. The DMCC say they haven't concealed any breaches or sought to influence Ernst & Young. They claim their sourcing guidelines weren't altered to favour any refinery or interfere with the audit process. Ernst & Young Dubai say they did highly professional work in auditing Culotti and have secured improvements in supply chains. Instances of non-compliance were fully reported to the regulator and client and corrected. They say they took the views of Mr. Rehan seriously and acted on expert advice.